You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village. Alongside Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1. We haven't been in here in weeks. Lots to catch up on. Let's start with the holidays. How were they?
That was great. It was great to be off for a couple weeks. It actually felt like we hadn't been in here in a year when I walked downstairs. It was something. No, it was nice. You still work over the holidays. Your computer's still on all the time. We're in the news business. But it was nice to have a little bit of a slowdown, catch up with family.
I can't believe they didn't spring for a new set while we were gone.
I know. I thought I was going to come down and there'd be like new decorations up or new lighting or something, but nothing changed.
Nothing has changed. We're back. Derek is back with us as well. Lots to cover, and 2023 is going to be a remarkable year here on Inside the Village. A couple things I want to touch on, but before we get to that, rumor out of Sault Ste. Marie, a huge lottery win to the tune of almost $50 million.
Yeah, I know we're talking about this now because it's today, right? So
Right.
We come in the office today and everyone's talking about the fact that the OLG put out a release saying that the $48 million Lotto 649 winner bought their ticket in Sault Ste. Marie.
Right.
So it's all that everyone is talking about.
And it wasn't me.
Yeah, and on Sault today when we
And it wasn't you.
You wouldn't be here. you would have never.
I'd be here. I would just have a very big smile.
We would never see you again. So the Sault Today article just went wild. Of course, right? Everybody's clicking on that to see if there's any information. And of course, everyone starts dreaming. That's what it's the way that these things work. Everybody's talking about what they would do with the money and who is it. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of rumors flying around and a lot of people trying to confirm some things.
Let me ask you this. Is $50 million too much?
I think it's, everyone's going to think I'm a loser, but I've been saying this my whole life. You can ask my friends I grew up with. I would never want to win a lottery because it's almost like it ruins what your life was supposed to be, right? It's like, well, what am I going to accomplish? What am I going to do with my life? It's like, I won $40 million, so it's not real. It's like a fantasy land. And I swear, you can ask anyone who I've known for a long, long time, said that forever.
Yeah, I think 50 is too much. I mean, 5 or 10 would be great.
Mm-hmm.
But think of the good that you could do, and you and I talked about this before we started. You could do make some real change.
I think you could. I think we had that story out of Aurelia. I think it was earlier in the year. Remember those
That's
two
right.
friends that what did they win, like $10 million or something?
Yeah,
they basically divvied it all up, and they spent a lot of time taking. There's been cases like that. I think there was someone on the East Coast a few years ago, an old elderly couple that did the same thing. They waited almost a year to claim the prize and to make it public, and they had basically had a long list of who was going to get a $10,000 check here, a $20,000 check there. So there's some good you do that. But to be honest, I think everybody says that, but I don't think it happens very often. I think people take their $48 million, get some yachts and some cottages on the water, and
absolutely,
that's it.
Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see who it is. Of course, they have up to a year to claim.
That's what I understand, and they have to go to Toronto, so we'll see what happens.
All right, we will stay tuned, as they say. It's been a busy few weeks here, literally inside the village, with some new site launches.
Yeah, right around the holidays, we've had two new sites come on board. Very, very excited. They're both a little different. Both in the Niagara region, joining our site, Thorold Today. The Niagara on the Lake Local is a local newspaper there, and we're in a unique partnership with them. We've never done this before, but they're going to keep operating the weekly newspaper.
Right.
And we're going to run the website. And Penny Coles is the editor there. She's fantastic. I'm really excited to be working with Village, and we're really excited to be working with her. And I can tell you, I've really enjoyed the copy that's coming out of there already. We've only been there a few weeks, and the stories are fantastic. And then Niagara on the Lake is one of those super engaged communities, right? There's a high voter turnout. People care. It's a very historic place. People really care about the community. So it's a great place to be. And then on Monday, January 9th, we launched pelhamtoday.ca, which is also was a community newspaper, the voice of Pelham. It was operational for about 25 years, really served the community well, huge readership, and they closed down because the reality of the newspaper market is very difficult. It's not the same as it was when they started 25 years ago. But Dave Burkett's the editor there, and he's working for us now, and he's bringing the same team of great journalists who worked at The Voice to Pelham Today. And I can tell you the launch has been phenomenal. I mean, I think the people of Pelham were waiting for this because they knew it was coming. And I'm just really excited by the team we have there in Niagara now, and then the coverage and the stories we're going to tell.
And that brings our total number of sites now to
20 in Ontario owned and operated. So it's a big exciting. It's a milestone, I would say.
Yeah, it is. Fantastic.
20.
Can't wait to see what those two teams get up to in the next little while. We don't do the work that we do for awards, but as the saying goes, it is an honor just to be nominated. And I understand that we've recently had a few nominations come our way.
Yeah, right before we closed our end of the year review show, the Canadian Online Publishing Awards came out with their nominations. And we were nominated in 5 different categories, which is a big honor for us here at Village. Journalist James Hopkin from Suit Today was nominated for 2 separate awards. Our team in Barrie was nominated. Raymond Bowe, Nikki Cole, Sean Gibson. We had Heidi Ulrichsen in Sudbury, who's covered the Laurentian insolvency well. We've talked about that on the show. She was nominated for Best Continuing Coverage of a Story. Our Big Read series was nominated in the columns category. A piece written by Marge Bruneman, a piece written by Eric Engel, and again by James Hopkin at Suit Today. And Natasha Philpott, who sadly is no longer with us. She's left and gone on, left Innisfil today, but she was nominated for Best Feel-Good Story. You know, we don't do this for awards for sure, and that's not why we're in the journalism business. But it really does show people that Village Media brings the goods. We do great work here at Village. I read it every day, and I just think it's to be nominated in these categories by this organization. It's a testament to what we do, and I'm really proud of it.
Absolutely, and so you should be. I guess the biggest shock, somehow, Inside the Village did not get the nod in the podcast category.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did we put the podcast over there?
I don't even know who files the nominations or how that works.
We need to find that out.
You know what? We'll get them next year. That's what they say. We'll get them next year.
Or we'll win the lottery.
That's right. That might be better.
Yeah.
Actually, we probably have a better chance of winning the lottery than we do of winning Podcast of the Year at any level.
Let's try.
But I digress. Okay, big show today. We're going to be talking to Alison Craig, who's a criminal defense attorney out of Toronto, about the catch and release bail situation in the country.
For sure. We had the tragic story over the Christmas holidays of an OPP officer being shot near Hagersville, Ontario. And in the early days after this shooting, we found out that one of the accused killers was out on bail, had a lifetime firearms ban against him. And obviously that triggers a lot of emotional response of people wondering what's wrong with our bail system. Why is this person out of prison to allegedly commit a crime like this? And I think we're going to talk to Alison and really take a deeper dive into how the bail system works. And, you know, it's just not as simple as people think.
All right, Alison Craig joins us next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Pleased to be joined on the program now by Alison Craig, the founding partner and criminal defense attorney at Posner, Craig & Stein in Toronto. Alison, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Alison, thanks so much. We reached out to you because obviously a lot of people in Ontario and across the country have been talking about police shootings, unfortunately, lately, and especially the one that happened over the Christmas holidays, Constable Greg Pierzchala near Hagersville, Ontario. We're hoping to chat with you sort of about what the bail system is really like in Canada, the way it really works. 'Cause a lot of people have strong opinions, but they really have no idea how the system works. But before we get into that, let's talk about this particular case first, right? We all followed on the news. The details trickled out pretty quickly after this shooting. Randall McKenzie, one of the accused in this case, had a lengthy criminal record, including a lifetime firearm prohibition that was handed down in 2018. In 2021, he was charged with numerous weapons-related offenses, including carrying a handgun with a defaced serial number and assaulting a peace officer. He was initially denied bail in that case, which was in Hamilton. And later, after that decision was reviewed, he was eventually granted bail in the summer of 2022 under strict conditions, including that he wear a GPS monitor. And then now, as everyone knows, he was out on bail when this crime occurred, when he allegedly killed this officer. And those are the facts that everyone understands. And everyone had their initial reaction to this shooting. I'd like to know what your initial reaction was. I assume it might be a little bit different than the average person.
Not necessarily my initial reaction. I mean, my initial reaction is probably the same as everybody else's, which is that it was incredibly tragic and horrific. And, my thoughts go out to the officer and his family and his police family. So that was my initial reaction. I'm sure like everybody else. But then once the bad bail takes started flowing, my reaction was probably different than most.
And you really saw that coming, right? I think even on your Twitter page, you even said to members of the media, if you want to talk about this, let's chat. And that's one of the reasons we reached out to you. What bothered you, I guess?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, everybody had an opinion, and nobody other than the people that were in the courtroom the day he was granted bail knows enough to have an opinion. So that was my first issue, because a lot of evidence is called at bail hearings, and there's a lot of complex legal principles that go into a decision. So that was my first problem. And the second one was that every politician I heard started talking about how we have a catch and release bail system, Pierre Poilievre and John Tory and on and on and on. And nothing could be further from the truth, at least with respect to serious charges like firearms charges, significant violent charges, those sorts of things. So those are my two biggest issues that I've struggled with.
Alison, the commissioner of the OPP certainly did not mince words in a press conference shortly after the shooting, suggested that Canada's bail system is to blame for Constable Pierzchala's death. He said he was outraged that McKenzie was out on bail when he allegedly killed the officer. Should we not be outraged?
Certainly you should. I mean, everybody is entitled to be outraged that an officer died in the line of duty. I think that's perfectly fair. But I don't think it's fair for the commissioner or anybody else to be outraged without knowing the facts behind why he was granted bail. For example, I mean, I know as much about this case as anybody else does, but the first couple of things that came to my mind were, three. First of all, we have the presumption to reasonable bail in Canada. It's one of the guaranteed rights under the Charter. But so many factors could and probably did go into that decision, such as what was the strength of the case against him with respect to the firearms charges he was released on, right? If there was little to no likelihood, for example, that he was going to be convicted after a trial, is it right that he would have been sitting in jail for another year and a half or more awaiting that trial? I think most people, when you think about it that way, would say probably not. Similarly, I mean, he was not charged, at least as far as I've seen, with sort of the host of normal or regular illegal firearms charges. There's usually 6 or 7 that anybody, in Toronto with a handgun is going to be charged with. So what kind of sentence was he facing? Had he done the time at that point that he would have been sentenced to had he been convicted after trial? Again, if the answer to that is yes, then I think he probably was rightfully released on bail, because we shouldn't have a system in this country where people are induced to plead guilty to things in order to get out of jail when they've done their time, right? If you go up to somebody and say, all right, sir, you have the choice to plead guilty today and be released back to the community, or sit in jail for another year and a half waiting to prove your innocence. Is that right? Mm-hmm. No. So there's just so many things that we don't know, and nobody other than the people in that courtroom do, at least so far.
You make a great point, Alison, because you're right. I haven't seen a copy of the bail ruling in that case, and I don't think we will, right? Because that's protected. Would that be protected by publication ban until the end of these charges?
In all likelihood, yes, until the end of trial.
Yeah. So really, we have that ruling exists somewhere, but we haven't seen it. It's not in the public domain, so we don't know all the things that went into this ruling and why he was granted bail. And just to speak to further that, I mean, you've been involved in a lot of bail hearings. I assume you've represented a lot of clients in bail. It's a very complex process, a lot of things people don't grasp. Can you kind of maybe just walk us through it and just help people understand like how the process works, what things are taken into consideration by the judge or the justice of the peace, sort of what sort of things need to be balanced and sort of where the burden of proof lies, all those kind of things. What happens inside a bail hearing, I guess. And to be fair, I think a lot of people just have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So I'll do my best to kind of give a summary of it. Most of the time, the burden of proof is on the Crown attorney to prove why somebody should stay in jail pending their trial. There's exceptions to that, such as many firearms charges, homicide charges. When somebody is already on release and facing a breach of their bail, several of those seems to have applied to this gentleman. So the onus was probably on him to prove why he should have gotten out. But most of the time it's on the Crown. And then there's 3 grounds upon which somebody can be detained pending trial. One is in order to make sure they show up to court. The second one, called the secondary ground, is essentially, is there a significant likelihood that this person will reoffend if they are released? And then the last one is sort of the public interest ground, or the tertiary ground, which basically means, would a reasonable person be outraged if this person was released on bail? But I hasten to add, it's the reasonable person properly instructed on the law. So not just anybody who doesn't know anything about bail, but somebody who knows all of the laws in Canada. So those are the 3 grounds. And, factors that go into those assessments include the strength of the Crown's case on the underlying charges, what kind of sentence they're facing, whether or not a firearm was involved, and then maybe not most importantly, but just as important, the strength of the release plan, which in this case seems to have been very, very strong, at least based on the conditions he was on.
The other thing that it's always easy in hindsight to say, well, look what happened here. This person should have been behind bars. Should have never been granted bail. But am I right to assume, Alison, that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people granted bail who never do anything, right? Is that accurate, or am I over-exaggerating?
That is completely accurate, yes. And certainly, minor breaches, that I'd call them, of being 20 minutes late for curfew, those sorts of things, those aren't particularly uncommon. But certainly reoffending violently when you're on bail for serious conditions is relatively rare, I would say. Just in the last I'm sure the public is going to be pleased to hear this, but in the last, year and a half, 2 years, I've gotten 7 clients released on bail who are facing murder charges. And they are all still out now. Not one of them has been charged with even a minor breach, never mind a significant offense. And these are people facing murder charges. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The vast majority don't reoffend violently. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but nobody has a crystal ball, so every bail hearing is a balancing act.
Alison, there's obviously a cost element here too. It's certainly not feasible for us to keep every accused person locked up until their trial. It would bankrupt the government. I think it was the 2012 Drummond Report on government spending that found the cost of detaining an adult prior to trial was about $185 a day versus the $5 a day cost to supervise in the community. How much does cost come into play here?
Certainly, I think one thing that does deserve some further consideration as a result of this is having more resources in the community, particularly smaller jurisdictions like the OPP in many parts of Ontario, to do bail compliance. Like in Toronto, the Toronto Police have an entire bail compliance unit whose one and only job is to go out and make sure people are complying with their bail. They don't have the resources really in smaller communities to do that. And I think that's, before we jump to bail reform and keeping everybody in jail at an exorbitant cost, both to the government and to the people we're talking about that have to sit in jail, I think the first step is trying to find more resources to put into bail compliance checks and bail monitoring in the community. Like, as I understand it, the man charged with this, with the officer's homicide, he'd had a warrant out for his arrest for months and months and months. And so, as harsh as this might sound, it seems to me, at least from what I know in this case, that the bail system did its job. A warrant was issued when he breached. I haven't heard anything about what the police did over those several months to try and track this guy down and arrest him. So it seems to me like the bail system did its job and the police didn't.
That's a great point I hadn't thought of.
Yeah. Alison, you used the term catch and release, and that's certainly a term that we're hearing a lot lately. Various police chiefs across the country are throwing that term out there, arguing that criminals are essentially being released before the ink on their charge sheet is dry. What would you say to those police chiefs?
The bane of my existence, quite literally, is setting bail hearings for people charged with firearms offenses, at least in Toronto and now spreading certainly across Southern Ontario. You cannot get out on bail if you're charged with a firearms offense for days, more likely weeks, if not longer. So I don't know about years ago now, I guess, Doug Ford implemented this gun bail program in Toronto, and the principle of it has expanded outwards. And essentially, now at every Toronto courthouse, there's a team of crowns called the gun bail team. And their one and only job is to keep everybody charged with firearms offenses in jail. And you have to set what's called a special bail hearing. It requires a judicial pretrial and meeting with the trial coordinator. On and on and on it goes. You do not just get to show up in bail court and have your bail hearing. It takes forever. So certainly with respect to firearms charges, which is what this complaint has been about since the officer's death, that is just quite simply not true. And it's the bail system in general is grossly underfunded. So anything where you're calling more than one surety, for example, which you're pretty much always going to do if you can for any serious violent offense, drug offense, gun offense, you have to schedule a bail hearing in advance. You don't just get to run it in bail court, ever.
You know, you talk about the catch and release, and a lot of people, as you've seen in your Twitter feed, I'm sure too, just calling, we need to blow up the system. We need a full-scale review of what's going on with bail in this country. But I think it's fair to say, just from, someone who reads the news, there's been plenty of reviews in recent years looking deeply at our bail system and what the real problems are with our bail system. And I think the conclusion has been pretty much the same, that it's not fair. It's not a fair system in a lot of ways. Indigenous people are denied bail more often than others. Black people spend longer in pretrial detention than white people do. The Supreme Court has been pretty clear on their views on how the bail system should work. So it feels like we've been trying to deal with those systemic problems with it, and now these people are calling for basically the opposite, right? I mean, what is the real problem with the bail system as you see it?
I mean, what you just said, first of all, which is the over-reliance on sureties and the over-reliance on strict conditions and the over-reliance on pledging large sums of money, because that's the very reason that so many, young Black men and Indigenous offenders can't get bail, and so are stuck in pretrial detention much longer, because we expect all of those things of their friends and family. And then the inducement to plead guilty starts a cycle. So people who can't get bail, such as Indigenous accused and young Black men, will then end up pleading guilty in order to get out of jail to things that they either didn't do or could have successfully beat at trial. And then that makes it harder for them to get bail the next time because they have a record, and on and on and on it goes. And so it's a cycle that's creates the institutionalization of these people who are overrepresented in our jails already. So, I mean, bail, to be perfectly honest, needs to be granted more often, not the opposite. Otherwise, you create this vicious cycle of institutionalization. But I certainly would support greater compliance checks. I do think that that's one thing that I would wholeheartedly support. And I think it would be the solution to a lot of people's concerns. I mean, for the clients I was talking about that are facing murder charges right now out on bail, the police are at their door every other day checking in on them to make sure that they're abiding by their conditions. And what do you know? Not a single one of them has had even a minor breach. So there is a deterrent effect to bail compliance checks and bail enforcement. So the answer is not locking everybody up in jail. Mm-hmm. It's better enforcement and better compliance.
It's interesting, too, because this Randall McKenzie we're talking about, he's an Indigenous man, 25 years old, from the Onondaga First Nations of the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And I wonder if we were able to read this bail judgment, that was probably taken into consideration, right? I mean, that the Supreme Court has asked the system to take that into consideration, right? Can you explain? I think a lot of people might not understand that, Alison. Why is that a factor that the system would take into consideration?
So there was a case many years ago called Gladue, and now there's what we know as Gladue principles, which essentially says whenever you're dealing with sentencing or bail, you have to consider somebody's status as an Indigenous person, and the generational trauma that, in all likelihood, factored into their getting involved in the criminal justice system, whether it be due to trauma or addiction or those sorts of things. And that's why, because it's now well recognized that the intergenerational trauma that Indigenous people have suffered is what has led to much of their involvement in the criminal justice system. And we have to take, as a country, ownership and responsibility for that. And the solution is not just to continue the cycle by locking everybody up and traumatizing them more.
For sure. Not to make an excuse, we're not making excuses, but that's just the reality of the situation. The Supreme Court and courts have been very clear on that.
Allison, various police associations are kind of banding together to conduct their own assessment of the bail system. What do you think they'll find?
Well, I assume they're going to say that anybody charged with firearms, weapons, assaults, drugs, and pretty much anybody other than shoplifting, maybe, should be kept in custody pending trial. That's kind of what I expect. And while I certainly understand, the upset of the police family for obvious reasons, I think the biggest grain of salt needs to be taken to any recommendations that they make. I mean, it kind of harkens back to when Harper was in office and instituted mandatory minimum sentence for pretty much everything, all of which have now been, most of which have been struck down as unconstitutional ever since and have now been gotten rid of as a result. So knee-jerk reactions never work, ever, ever, ever. It's discussion. An informed discussion is never a bad thing, but knee-jerk reactions are almost always a bad thing. And, whatever recommendations they come up with will no doubt be found by the courts to be unconstitutional. So I think you have to be a little bit careful.
Have you had any luck convincing people, say, on your Twitter feed who don't agree with you? Have you had any luck making headway? Are you convincing people to take a closer look?
Yeah, I've actually had I've been pleasantly surprised by how many people have just, sent me DMs or called me or whatever, just asking questions because they don't know how it works. And once they understand and they, understand that, all of my clients on gun charges are at home with an ankle bracelet on house arrest, not just roaming the streets, shooting places up. I think they do start to realize, I've had positive reaction for the most part, with obvious exceptions.
That's good to know. Well, we do appreciate you taking the time to explain this to our listeners. I think it's very important that they understand. I don't think they've heard anything more detailed than this before. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you think we should be asking you?
No, I'm always happy to answer any questions that people have, but it's important whenever you're having this discussion to remember that people are presumed innocent. And very often people are found not guilty. And the last thing that we can have is a cycle that induces people to plead guilty to things that they didn't do in order to get out of jail. And that should be at the forefront. Obviously, public safety is important, but solutions that protect public safety, such as bail compliance, checks, and enforcement, ought to be solution number one, rather than creating a cycle where people are pleading guilty just to get out of jail.
All right, Allison Craig, founding partner at Posner, Craig & Stein in Toronto. Allison, thanks for doing this wonderful insight, and enjoy the East Coast for a couple of months.
Thank you. I'm off to get some lobster.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on episode 1 of season 2 here on Inside the Village. Now, we should mention, Frisco, the comment that we made to Allison, enjoy the East Coast. She just got to Halifax to start a lengthy trial. She thinks she'll be there for a couple of months in a hotel room, no less, with her cat.
Yeah, wow. I've covered some trials, and I was there for a long time in hotel rooms. I couldn't imagine doing it as a lawyer. That's a long time.
Can you imagine the amount of lobster you could eat in 2 months?
I know. She seemed excited that she was going to go get some
That's
seafood.
what she said.
Yeah, we should call her in a month and see if she's getting lobster.
Yeah, Allison's still liking the lobster? Probably not. It's a great debate, interesting discussion, and one that I'm thinking is far from over.
You know, it is. And I, as someone who, from a journalist perspective, has spent my whole career in the courts, I've covered lots of trials and poured my way through plenty of court documents. I have a pretty decent understanding of how the legal system works, and it's very complex, and I don't obviously have the level of understanding that she does. But bail hearings are a real balancing act, right? And the other thing that I should have asked Alison this, but part of the problem is most bail hearings are covered by a publication ban when they happen because the accused fair trial rights you can't jeopardize those. So they bring the bail hearing, everyone drops their pants, shows all their evidence, why or why not this person should be out on bail, what the allegations are. If that was reported in the paper at the time, then it could jeopardize his or her right to a fair trial. So the vast majority of the time that stuff never comes out. So people aren't even brought inside a courtroom via the media of how the bail hearing works. So they know even less than they would of a regular trial, which would be covered. Yeah, and of course the tragedy in all of this, another Ontario police officer shot and killed, Grzegorz Pierzchala, just a terrible tragedy. Absolutely, and our condolences obviously to his loved ones and the police in general, who severely mourn these losses. I mean, and this is, like we've talked about this before. Yeah. We all have friends and relatives who are police officers. That stress that weighs on them when they go answer a call, and we've been told, as you know, that there are no routine calls, right? So this can happen anytime you show up for work. But at the same time, as Allison said, if we're going to talk about tweaking the legal system and making it better, we need to make sure we understand all the angles and all the facts on how to do it, and make sure we do it in a way that's the smartest and not just the way that generates a good headline for a politician. Absolutely. All right, pal. Good to be back. We'll do it again next week, same time and most of this same station. Beautiful. Episode 2 of Inside the Village. And if you want to catch back episodes of the show, by the way, you can. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, across the Village Media Network, and at insidethevillage.ca. For Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.